Hello, all. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Greg Hanch, and I serve as the Executive Director of NAMI Texas, which is the Texas affiliate of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I am truly honored to be joined here today by Jeff Spivey, the former Chief of the Irving Police Department and the new Executive Director of the Caruth Police Institute. Jeff, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
Absolutely, it's our pleasure. So we are live on Facebook right now, and we also have an audience here in Zoom. Thank you all for taking some time out of your day to be a part of this conversation. I do encourage you, if you have questions, to use the Q&A feature in Zoom. You can enter your questions and we'll work to address those at the end of our conversation. And for anyone watching live on Facebook, please feel free to enter questions into the Facebook chat because we're monitoring that as well. Today, we're here to talk about mental health in the context of law enforcement. Now, usually when we talk about that, it's what are law enforcement doing to help people with mental health conditions. Today, there's a different spin on it. It's how can we support the mental health of those who work in law enforcement? It occurs to me that we as a society rely on law enforcement to perform many different functions, and that we put a lot of pressure on police. It also occurs to me that police are exposed to a lot of things day to day that can have an impact on their mental health. So I think it's important as a mental health community that we address the mental health needs of law enforcement. Before I ask Jeff to introduce himself and share his perspective, I want to thank our sponsor, Aetna, for supporting NAMI's Frontline wellness initiatives. Frontline professionals face many challenges in their day-to-day work, from the pressure of making sure people get the help and care that they need to working long shifts. Healthcare and public safety are stressful fields of work. For many frontline professionals, the pandemic has taken a toll on their mental health, and that's an additional toll on top of the long existing stresses and pressures. We want anyone to know who is a frontline professional that if they're struggling, that they're not alone. We want you to know that NAMI is here to help and that there are other resources, such as the Texas Law Enforcement Peer Network, that are here to help. NAMI is pleased to be part of the First Responders First initiative to support frontline healthcare and public safety professionals facing mental health concerns. This community-centered initiative is called NAMI Frontline Wellness, and we'll be hosting a series of webinars throughout the year focusing on the mental health of public safety and healthcare professionals. So let's get into a conversation with Jeff. Jeff, would you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you came to join the Texas Law Enforcement Peer Network?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thanks for the opportunity to be here today to talk about the program that we're creating. So Jeff Spivey, as you've already mentioned, 35 years with the Irving Police Department. Worked my way through the ranks, spent the last 5 years as the Chief of Police for the Irving Police Department. You know, in that time period, I really saw policing change and experienced some of the same things that we're going to talk about today, from trauma to stress, personal issues, all those things that really weigh upon a police officer. And I had the opportunity a little over 2 years ago to be the chairman of the Executive Advisory Board for the Caruth Police Institute. And in working with BJ Wagner, who was the executive director at the time and who deserves all of the credit for the program that we're going to talk about today, I really saw the passion, saw the impact she was going to have with this program, and felt compelled to be as involved as I could. When the opportunity came about to, step out of policing and step over to assume the role of executive director for Caruth and really stand this program up across the state, I couldn't pass it up. And so I retired at the end of January, started February 1st in my new role, and we've hit the ground running to get this program up and going across the state of Texas.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jeff. It occurs to me that they really found a good fit for this position of executive director, given your years of experience on different levels in the law enforcement profession, because you're going to be able to bring those insights of what is impacting police officers on a day-to-day basis, to your new position, and make sure that we're tailoring programs and services to the particular needs of those who are on the front lines. So I'm just pleased that you've joined this mental health community, and you're going to be working in the role that you have.
Well, again, thank you for that. I feel a little bit overwhelmed with the task ahead, but I don't want to, as this conversation goes on, I don't want anyone to think that this is a Jeff Spivey program. The former executive director, BJ Wagner, worked tirelessly to put this together. We've worked with professionals from across the state to bring these resources together. And I'm just fortunate enough to be stepping into the role as we roll it out, and excited about what it's going to mean for the mental health of our first responders.
Thank you. So I'm curious, in your experience and in your perspective, how do you see mental health and mental health care fitting into the culture of policing? Are these commonly discussed and commonly addressed topics, or are they more kind of in the shadows? How does that work culturally in the field of law enforcement?
So traditionally, they haven't been a good fit at all. The culture of policing has been such that, the ability for you to admit that you're struggling with something, to admit that you have a weakness, you would never do that. We grew up in this rough and tough culture of, you suck it up, you rub some dirt on it, and you keep going. I talk about and share my experience when I first hired on with the Irving Police Department. We had a culture where you didn't call in sick, no matter how sick you were. You just didn't call in sick. If you just couldn't show up for work, you took vacation, but you didn't admit that you were sick or that you needed help. And for those who aren't in law enforcement who are watching this, I know that there may be this misconception of what dark humor is from a policing standpoint, where you see some police officers standing around some abhorrent scene or have just experienced some trauma, and you hear them maybe talking off color or sharing jokes, and you wonder what that's about. And it's really a coping mechanism to deal with something that you can't readily admit to your peers that it's really bothering you. And so you tend to make light of it, or you tend to blow it off. And deep down inside, it's really bothering you and tearing you up. One of my dearest friends from Irving PD used to say we have a tendency to eat our own, and there was no truer statement than that. That anytime an officer would admit some weakness or some failing, it was like bleeding in a shark tank, and so you just learn to suppress those feelings and not admit those weaknesses. And I think what we've realized certainly over the last 10 years is we've created that culture where it's unacceptable to ask for help, and we recognize that can't continue, and we have to take steps to destigmatize that willingness to go, what, I'm struggling with whatever that is, whether it's some traumatic experience, some process that's happened, or whether it's just the burdens of day-to-day life that have piled up. We have to make it okay for those men and women to say, I'm not okay and I need some help.
So you talk about how the culture of policing is such that mental health isn't often discussed openly. And if a mental health concern does get brought to the forefront, it can be seen as a sign of weakness. And there's not really a common practice of encouraging law enforcement officers to reach out if support is needed. Are there any other barriers that you see in terms of law enforcement officers accessing mental health care, and probably we're talking about traditional mental health care, like seeing a psychiatrist or a counselor, not so much the peer support variety. What are the barriers that you see beyond the cultural barriers to accessing care?
I think when we start looking at what created that culture, it was police administrators who would take some negative employment action against a police officer who sought those types of services. You would be suspended or put on leave. You would have your badge and your gun taken away from you. You would be seen as not being able to fulfill the role of a police officer, and so you would, typically or could be taken away from the agency, separated from the agency, and lose your job. And so that, as your peers saw that happening, or as that was discussed around the country or around the police forces in the state, you would hear those stories and you would think, well, I don't want to be that person. I need my job. I love what I do. So I'm not going to ask for help. I'm not going to admit that weakness because I don't want to lose my job, or to have my badge and gun taken away from me and put on desk duty, or whatever that leave would look like. And so the tendency would be to bury those feelings, to self-medicate, to seek out high-risk behaviors, as a way to cope with what you were feeling, and instead of seeking those services. And so what we found is, we had police officers struggling with burnout, with cynicism, depression, ultimately suicide. Fortunately, though, we've, I think, done a better job, certainly in the last 10 years, of recognizing that culture that administrators have created, and are making strides to address that and really change that culture, again, destigmatizing that request for help.
Well said, very well said. So I'd like to shift gears and talk a little more about the Texas Law Enforcement Peer Network, and kind of get your perspective on the current state and where we're headed with this program. So I look at that acronym TLEPN, and I focus in on the P, which is peer. And for those on this webinar with NAMI, I suspect many of them are very familiar with the concept of peer services or peer support services. There may be some folks on here who aren't familiar. And of course, NAMI in our programming has a very strong emphasis on peer-based services as well as family-based services. I'm curious, from your perspective, how are you defining peer support, and what makes it such a vital resource for law enforcement?
So great question. We're defining peer support as other police officers who are active duty police officers within the state of Texas. In order to take advantage of this program, you have to be a current law enforcement officer in the state of Texas. And in order to be a peer within the program, you have to be a current law enforcement officer in the state of Texas. And what we find, police officers are typically very skeptical by nature. We tend to only trust those people who we've come to rely on, and people who have shared experiences as us. And so people who can understand the unique nature of the work that we do. So peer services gives those officers access to other officers who we've provided training to help, provide an outlet for stress and trauma, anger, sadness, and mental fatigue that the job or just ordinary life can put on them. And it's not as uncomfortable to have those conversations with someone who understands where you're coming from, as opposed to going to some professional who you're worried will judge you, who knows what you do for a living, and begin to doubt you or the profession because of the struggles that you have. And so having that peer connection is really a powerful outlet for those emotions.
Absolutely. You know, I think that's a great way of capturing the philosophy behind peer support. So you have people with lived experience that aligns with the people who are going to be accessing the resource. So you kind of have this alignment in background and in experience and kind of just in general where they're coming from, which facilitates connection, facilitates rapport between the person providing the services and the person receiving the services. And that's really it. There's a magic there that can't be replicated by any other service in the mental health system. You know, I mean, and that's not to say anything pejorative about psychiatrists or counselors or social workers or any other trained mental health professional. This is, I imagine, is not meant to replace those other types of mental health services. It's meant maybe to be a bridge to those services or a supplement to those services. Is that
absolutely?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to give the impression that these peer supporters are providing any kind of professional help, because they're not trained for that. They are absolutely acting as that sounding board, listening for those things that they've been trained to hear, you know, where they can talk about resiliency and they can talk about stress management. But when they hear those cues of, hey, this person is truly in crisis and needs help, you know, they have the resources that they can refer out, that have that professional training, that can provide that counseling or provide those services that that person at that time needs. By no means are we training, you know, psychologists or psychiatrists or even mental health counselors to provide this service. They are truly just peers.
Great. And can you tell me a little bit more about the training that is being provided to the peer supporters who are providing the services within this programming? What does that training look like?
So the training is now approved by TICO, which is the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. That's our certifying body in the state of Texas for police officers to have a license to be a peace officer. It's a 16-hour course that our peers go through. They're trained to handle critical incidents by a peer support team, trained to, you know, help develop resiliency within those people seeking services. There's class discussion and questions around different scenarios. The class and the instruction has scenarios based around critical incidents, how they're handled, family care, and, you know, just putting all of that together then to demonstrate you know, they understand and can apply what they've learned during that course.
So my question then is, after a law enforcement officer receives that 16-hour training, where do they go from there in terms of actually providing the services? Like, are they continuing to work for their home law enforcement agency? Are they employed by the network? How does that work?
No, this is a strictly voluntary program for our peer supporters. Now, the program itself, the Law Enforcement Peer Network, has been given money through the state. Senate Bill 64 was the legislation that stood this up, and allows us to hire a statewide director and 3 regional directors to really support this program. We're working to identify some in-kind services from other police departments who have peer programs, who, you know, have that training and have that ability to provide peers to help us with the program. But these peer supporters will continue working for their department, you know, continue to do the job that they're doing. This is just an added responsibility that they're taking on because they too have a desire to better the profession and help their peers who are suffering through these kinds of struggles.
Excellent, excellent. And I'm glad you mentioned the legislation that created this program, and the person in the legislature who really became a champion for this issue, Senator Jane Nelson, who is retiring. I just think it really goes to show how innovative and outside of the box thinking is so important when we're designing mental health services. Like this, is probably a topic that isn't front of mind for the general public as it relates to mental health. So it's really good that we have people working kind of behind the scenes, advocates, researchers, policy analysts, and legislators who are attuned to the mental health needs of law enforcement and who were able to work together and get on the same page about a viable strategy for addressing it. So I just want to comment there and thank Senator Nelson and thank the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute for their leadership on creating this program.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't thank her enough. Her leadership in this and getting the legislation passed. As you stated, Meadows did a wonderful job of providing us that expertise and the resources needed to craft the legislation and help us to get it pushed through. But it was one of those legislative items that had bipartisan support. Everyone recognized the need to provide this opportunity and provide this program to our police officers. And absolutely thanks to Senator Nelson for her leadership.
Yes, for sure. So now that we've kind of talked about the general structure of the network and how it's staffed and who is providing the peer support services and how they're trained, I'm thinking about the access points by which people will receive these services. So if you're a law enforcement officer, and like when this program is like fully up and running and available, if you're a law enforcement officer and let's just say you're having a hard time, what would be your next step in accessing the program?
So what we're going to ask of our law enforcement officers across the state is to not wait until you're having a hard time to take that first step. We've created an app. We've worked with an app company to develop this, and I've heard BJ describe it as Uber for mental health services. And so what you'll do as a law enforcement officer in Texas is you'll go to your MyTCOL account and you'll access your account and be able to get an access code in order to download this app. The app will be available in both the Apple and the Google Play stores. We created this extra step of security so that not just anyone can download the app. You'll have to access it through your MyTCOL account, which means you're an active law enforcement officer in the state of Texas. And so once you get that access code, you can download the app. We're encouraging those people who download the app to set up an account and not use your real name and not use any information that could identify you. Anonymity is a big thing with this, as you can imagine, for the reasons that I've already talked about, that stigma that exists, that fear that if my chief finds out that I'm having trouble, then I'm going to lose my job. So, we can't track who downloads the app, and we don't want you, once you sign up for the app, to use your real information if you're not comfortable doing that. And so you set up an account, and then if you find yourself in need of services, you'll go to that app and you'll request those services. And what will happen is you'll be given an opportunity to look across the region or across the state at the different regions in the state. So if you're not comfortable requesting peer services from someone within your region, you can request those services, anywhere in the state of Texas, and a request will be sent out to that region. A peer supporter will see that request and respond to you, and you'll agree on how you want to connect, whether it's by telephone, text message, email, whatever that looks like. And again, whatever you're comfortable with connecting. Now, if that request goes unanswered for 4 hours, that request is then elevated to the regional director, and the regional director will see that and then make sure that a peer is assigned to that request and reaches out and makes connection. And then after another 20 hours, if that connection still hasn't been made, it's elevated to the state director. We wanted to ensure that, we didn't have people requesting services and then go longer than 24 hours without having those services addressed. And so we've created these levels of escalation so that we ensure that within 24 hours of your request, you're going to get a contact from somebody in the network to start working with you in providing those peer services. And so it's all there in the app. We'll have access, or the people who download the access will have the ability to take a wellness survey if they choose. They'll have resources there that are available to them if they choose to go the professional route. It's just an added tool on their tool belt to use to address their mental health needs at the time.
Fantastic. That's great information. I learned a lot in what you said, and I think it's so important that the people who are reaching out to this network through the app are getting a response within a reasonable period of time. And I think the plan that you've laid out to make sure that happened, happens makes a lot of sense, and it's encouraging that people will be connected with resources as quickly as possible. And additionally, there's that piece of having access to other resources outside of the peer supporters that are part of the Texas Law Enforcement Peer Network. Like, we know that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to addressing mental health. A person who reaches out to the network may benefit from the peer support that they receive through the network. They may find that it's not for them, but through looking at the resources, like external resources that are listed in the app, which will hopefully include NAMI, maybe they do find what they're looking for, and maybe it's a clinical mental health counselor, some other valuable program out there. So I commend you and BJ and the team for taking that approach of linking people up with resources beyond the particular one that you're providing.
Yeah, I think many times what we box ourselves in by only, we're a peer network, and so we're only going to offer peer services, and not everyone's comfortable with that. The program that I started when I was chief at Irving, when we stood up a peer program, what we've done is we've layered onto that peer program so that if you don't want to use the peer program, there's other resources available to you. And what we have to recognize is not everyone's going to feel comfortable accessing the same type of resource. And if we're truly wanting to help our police officers get the help that they need, then we have to provide a wide variety of resources so that you find that one that you're comfortable with using, because that's going to be the one you use. If you're not comfortable, then you're just going to choose not to seek those services, and that's what we don't want.
Absolutely. I saw some media coverage related to the network recently, and I believe it was talking about one of the regional coordinators who had been hired. Do you have anything to share about your staff and their backgrounds? How's the hiring going?
Sure. So the hiring's going really well. I'm not sure which media source that you saw, but our first regional director came on board December, early January timeframe down in far away in South Texas. The FAR Police Department, Chief Harvey down there, a huge supporter of what we're doing, agreed to be one of those regional hubs for the South Texas region. They hired their first regional director. They were way out ahead of us. Chief Ellis in Belton was the second chief who came on. He's hired a regional director for the Central Texas region. And we've now hired our state director. Dustin has been on with us for, I guess, now a week. And so he's, hit the ground running, trying to get his head around what the responsibilities are. We're working with Irving PD. We have an MOU with Irving PD to get the North Texas region fully staffed with a regional director. And so I think once we get that regional director in Irving for North Texas in place, we'll have the positions that we have the funding to hire in place, and we'll start promoting the program, and those regional directors will be responsible for going out and making contacts with police departments, talking to those chief administrators in those agencies, recruiting peer members for that region, and really developing the program. Now, what we hope to have happen come next legislative session is to be back in Austin requesting full funding. Senate Bill 64, while as wonderful as it was, it only received half the funding we really needed to stand up a state director and 6 regional directors around the state. So we're going to go back to those elected officials and hopefully be able to talk about the success that we've had with their support and really build upon what we've done over the last 2 years.
We look forward to working with y'all on that upcoming legislative advocacy piece.
Well, we would love to have you as a part of that.
Count us in. So we only have a little bit of time left. There's a question in from the audience. I just want to make sure before we ask that audience question, did you mention the rough approximate launch date for the availability of the network? Like, is there a target that you're looking at?
As soon as possible is really what we're targeting. We still have to get the app approved for the Apple store. We don't want to launch the program without having the app available. The program is really dependent upon that application being used to request those peer services, and it's taken a little while longer to get Apple approval to get that app available in their store. Now that we have the state director on, we have the 2 regional directors on, as soon as we can get that approval from Apple, I think we'll be rolling out very shortly after that.
Great. Thank you. Just another question for you, and I ask this because this is something that we've struggled with our peer support services, and I'm certain that other organizations do as well. Like, we work so hard to get these services in place, and we get the funding, we get the staff, we get the infrastructure, and then no one knows about it. Like, it's like under the radar. It's like the best kept secret in Texas. So how do what ideas do you have in terms of getting the word out, marketing, the program across the state?
Well, fortunately, I have you and NAMI to help promote that. We'll certainly be using social media to connect with those agencies. We'll be attending some conferences. Me and BJ and our statewide director, Dustin, will be presenting at an ICP conference in Seattle later in March. We'll be presenting down at the Texas Police Chiefs Association annual conference in Galveston in April. And then it'll really be incumbent upon those regional directors. And I know that Mike Mata, who's our regional director in FAR, and Houston Johnson, who's our regional director in Central Texas there in Belton, man, they have been out there knocking on doors, talking about the program to their agencies in those regions, and really relying on word of mouth to get that message out there. But we'll be using all the traditional outlets that we can, in the television coverage, the media coverage that we've received so far has really driven some interest into the program from those regions that have covered it. I think there was a TV station out of Waco and one down in South Texas that put that media attention around it, and it's really taken off for us.
Excellent. Great. And this may be the final question before we wrap up here. There's an audience question asking, is there a follow-up component to assess the future status of an officer who has received peer support? So after that kind of initial conversation occurs, facilitated through the app, is there any follow-up component in place to make sure the ongoing needs are met?
There's not a follow-up component as the program is designed, right? It's designed truly to be peer-to-peer. And so as long as that police officer is connected with that peer supporter, that ongoing relationship will occur. But at any point in time, that officer that has reached out can certainly choose to sever that relationship. And, if they feel like that they no longer need the service or whatever ends that relationship, there's really no way for us as a network to follow up with that person who's reached out. That's part of the anonymity issue that we have to deal with is, if we know that you're reaching out and we're, connecting you and following up with you, we've really done a poor job of keeping that anonymous. And
Right.
we don't want to damage or create any kind of suspicion around what we're ultimately trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's important. That absolutely makes sense to me. And, we need to respect people's boundaries in the services that we're providing, and certainly, not like reaching out when they're not asking to be reached out to. So a lot of it is the making sure that when this dialogue is happening through the network, that the person receiving the services knows, hey, you can always reach back out. Here are some follow-ups that you can do either through the app or other resources that are out there if you're finding yourself, needing support, needing care. So I think a lot of that, it's not follow-up per se, but it's encouragement to reach back out if more is needed.
Absolutely. And our peers will also be trained on, those red flags to look for. There's only a certain level of confidentiality that exists. If our peers are told that, you're ultimately going to hurt yourself or someone else, and there is some immediate threat to life or safety, they're going to step in and take some action. Or if, they're dealing with someone who's truly in an immediate crisis, they're going to refer that person to those professionals. But the program's really designed to avoid getting to that point and allowing those officers who initially begin to struggle that opportunity to reach out and start managing those emotions, start managing that illness long before it reaches that point.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, Jeff, for giving us this overview. There's a lot of valuable information in there. And, on behalf of NAMI Texas and our 26 affiliates and 1,700 members across the state, thank you for your leadership on this and for getting us up to speed on how this program is going to operate, how we might be able to interact with it. Super excited to see where it goes.
Well, thanks again, Greg, for giving us the platform and recognizing what we're doing and helping us get the word out.
Our pleasure. Thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.